looking back on it now, having experienced it, that's one of the things that I would really want to key in on is asking the contractor if I could interview one of his subcontractors, because I think that relationship tells you everything about how that contractor runs his business.
Well, and the other thing is, a lot of contractors bid out every single job. They don't have a long-term relationship with any subs. So they're using a sub, you want to know that. Well, you don't want to have a subcontractor who's never worked for that contractor, because they have no relationship. You don't know what they're going to do.
That was something that we got to during, and I really do want to talk about how I found you and some of those things. But in the process, I remember us talking, and I was asking you about your subs, and you told me that you'd had long-term relationships with them. And one of my fears is that once again I would find a contractor who's trying to go to the lowest bidder, basically bidding out every piece of the job to maybe the lowest bidder. Because you and I had agreed on a cost structure for the project, but so now, are you going to now try to go find the people who maybe aren't as qualified as they should be, because it's going to help your bottom end? And you were able to prove to me, assure me and prove to me right away that you'd had all these contractors, and then trust but verify. I certainly learned that.
But I think that your idea of, okay, give me a list of 3 of them, let me just talk to them, and then what's the relationship like,
I can remember when I came here and they were framing the house, and I talked to the subs that were doing that, and I remember talking to them, and you were not here, and your project, your site manager was busy somewhere, so I thought I could kind of get in there and talk to him. And they were very defensive of you, and I thought that was a great sign. They were like, "We only work for Bill. This is I don't have time to do this. I do projects for homeowners, and I work for Bill, and that's it. I don't have time to fool around with any of this other stuff." And so that just gave me that assurance that, once again, by that point in our relationship, I trusted you and things, but once you've been had a very bad experience like I did in the beginning, you're still,
No, it's good to get the verification and that it's really happening.
And it turned out with every one of the, just as another example, we hired a designer who has done very high-end designs, been in Orange Coast magazine and things like that, and so the designer, it turned out, had worked with you. We didn't know that at the time. And the designer, the subs that you were using, the designer team had told us, well, these are the best subs in Southern California, for things like tile and stuff. So it turned out, to be very, not only to be true, but not only were these subs that you'd use, but they were respected in the industry by others, not just your team at Masterworks, but people outside who work with many contractors as being some of the very best that you can get. So
So I think going back to the kind of summarizing maybe for the red flags, asking for a large deposit, it's a red flag. It's not a no-go kind of thing, but you just want to kind of understand. There's some sentiment in the industry that the contractor shouldn't play the bank. In other words, pay up front, have to float the job and then get paid for it. But, we do it a little differently. We get paid every 2 weeks, so we kind of take that equation out of it, but you're only paying for the work that got completed.
Right.
Which that was our answer to that flag.
That was something that really made me, in the very beginning, when we first were getting to know each other, I felt like if you were willing to do that basically I was only ever, in fact, you explained it to me, but that we were only ever paying for work that had already been done. Because kind of the question, you said you don't have to worry about it. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow or anything happens, you were only ever going to be out what you've done. Yeah. And of course, we had a very complex project. It took over a year, I think, to do it, and I'm sure it is because I remember living in an apartment somewhere for a year. But it was, it was every 2 weeks, and it was always for just what had already been accomplished.
Yeah.
And put out in the most professional, itemized in professional invoices that were always provided, ahead of time with exact accounting of what had been done and then what.
I think that's a good point too. Another little mini red flag is, how the accounting of things, because there's so much money changing hands between paying for, you're paying the designer, they're doing some of the materials, we're doing some of the materials, right. You're getting some of the materials, all the vendors, then all the subs, stuff's just coming and going, and the proper accounting of all that is daunting, but it isn't impossible. It's, you just need to stay up on top of it. And typically, if you're a one-man show, because I had to do it in the beginning, it's the last thing you want to do. You're tired at night and you're coming home to do the paperwork and trying to reconcile everything. It's hard. So, having an office, you don't have to necessarily have an office, but you have to have somebody other than yourself. You could hire an outside bookkeeper as a contractor, somebody that can, on a weekly basis, reconcile everything, so that if the customer needs some information, there it is. And then actually keeping the files for a length of time, because we have customers now that we've had for 25 years, and they call up and they go, hey, what's that paint color you used in 1992? We can look it up in our file, we have it there. That it's just all part of the whole thing. It's not just doing the work. There's a whole other side of it outside the work that, it's probably maybe even more important, keeping track of the money.
I don't know if we've actually talked about this before, but that's another point now that as we're going through this that I'm thinking about is not only, so what Masterworks provided, not only, so back to communication again, and this accounting of the money, because that's really where the frictions start.
Exactly.
I mean, communication and are we getting what we paid for?
Right.
But through Masterworks, through your company, the person that is doing that accounting, doing that invoice, was also available to us and had great communication. So if there was a issue with an invoice, or we had a question about it, or something like that, it was a phone call that would be answered right away or returned within that day, within an hour or two, or email away. So that was something that we really appreciated as well. And we didn't have to necessarily go through you, because we were not your only project. And although you were always going to get back to us, there wasn't one time in the entire year where if I called you and left you a message, I didn't hear back from you that day, if not within the next hour or two. But still, we had access to the person doing the bookkeeping and the invoicing, and we could have direct contact with your person doing that, and that was great for us. Another piece of just in the communication thing.
Because on jobs, there's we had stuff that we had to return that we didn't like, and who gets the credit, and keeping track of all that. I mean, it gets daunting when you've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things you're buying and coming and going, and money flowing in and out. So, I think that's a very, major thing to see how somebody does that. One way to find out would be to just ask, if you're the customer interviewing a contractor, would be, do you use QuickBooks or some sort of accounting software? If they don't, it doesn't mean that necessarily it's bad, but it kind of is a flag, because in that size of a project, it's pretty hard to just do it the old rote method of writing it down and using the old ledger form kind of thing.
I think it's absolutely a red flag, and I mean, there's going to be people. I'm a little bit embarrassed. People are watching this video, and I'm going to and I'm out here telling this. But some of the first invoices that I'd received from the previous contractor were these handwritten type variety, and that I think says something about the professionalism of that organization and what they just because of the business structure that they have set up, which in this case was pretty loose.
I think another thing that helps us keep track of the job by billing every 2 weeks is we have to review the job every 2 weeks in depth to see what did we really do, what's the percentage. Oh, don't forget there's that one thing. There might have been a change order. You catch all those things every 2 weeks. So it's good to be, it helps us, but it also helps the customer. Every 2 weeks they know where they stand, and I think that's a good way to do it.
Well, I think, in my experience working with you, was not only did we know where we stood, but we programmed some reconciliations at various times where we kind of said, here's what we've done in the project, because perhaps there's someone out there that can do this, but we couldn't do it, which was maintain the scope of our project.
Yeah.
Right? We sat down and we had an original idea, and you gave us an estimate of what that work was going to cost, which you were adhering to. But of course, as the project goes on and you start to see things, we change things.
Yeah.
We change the scope. And so as we did that, of course, you would tell us before we signed on to it, you gave us new estimates and add to the project costs and things like that. But we had these reconciliations where we would go through at various times. Hey, this is what we've done. This is what we've added. This is where we're going. And I think that was back to the communication. I can't imagine what it would be like to do a project that we did here and go months on end without talking about the money.
Yeah.
I think that we would be getting set up to. I think you're just gonna
you lose,
baking in friction,
and you lose track of the times you change things.
Right.
And the other stumbling block is another kind of a red flag, is the allowance. So the famous allowance is something that happens at the very first part of the project when you're anxious to start and we're anxious to sign a contract, but the materials haven't been chosen or the actual scope of work hasn't exactly been defined.
Mm-hmm.
So we go, well, we talked about it a little bit, we'll throw $25,000 in this pot to cover electrical, just it's a placeholder.
Right.
So as the project goes along, and as that allowance grows out of the 25,000, say, then there has to be, hey, we need to sit down because here's where it's headed. Do you really want to do that? And it's hard if you're not keeping track of it every day or every 2 weeks, reviewing it and going, right. Hey, look, this is how much we've already spent. We're not even halfway done. We've already spent 2/3 of the budget. We need to have a conversation. Is it that we screwed up, or is it you have added stuff? So that's just a conversation to have about what the reason is, but it needs to happen. It can't happen, when you're done and go back and try to piece it all together and remember that 6 months ago you said, oh no, we want all new lighting. Go ahead, that's fine,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think many times the conversation has to do with the people who are actually doing the project, between the two of them, because and that's why I think that the communication that you had and the way that you do the invoicing and we did the financial piece of it, it just lends itself to everybody being on the same sheet of music, and not getting off track. So those were definitely the things that I had not looked at, that I learned, through this process, and that I certainly didn't find the first time I found a contractor, and when I went looking, when I went to find someone that I could trust and work with to build us this home.
Well, and you touched on one thing too. It's interesting, when there's plenty of lists out there what to do to hire a contractor. There's a 10-point list that's pretty famous, and the thing is, like you were saying, it doesn't necessarily mean being licensed, get you anywhere, but it does start you in the right direction. But interesting statistics. There's 1.2 million contractors in the state of California, and only 300,000 are licensed. And so more than 75% of the contractors doing work are unlicensed. So and then within the licensed contractors, certainly there's all sorts of scams going on. There's irreputable people. I mean, it's just like any profession. But The other thing that's a flag would be not having workers' compensation and not having liability insurance. So you don't have to have either one to get a contractor's license. And some people get confused because in order to have a contractor's license, you're supposed to have a bond, but it's only for $7,500 and it only costs about $50 a month. So it's not a very
Good.
costly bond for a contractor to have, but it is required. So what that bond covers is a dispute. It could be a dispute of $100,000, and then you can get the $7,500. You don't have to have workers' comp if you're a sole proprietor and you do all the work yourself. So a lot of people hide behind that, and they cheat, and they don't have any employees, and they only hire, that's called a paper contractor. He's just a manager, and he only has subs. The red flag on that kind of contractor is no on-site supervision. So he doesn't have any employees, so therefore who's the project manager?
Right.
So we've run into that before where I've lost some bids on jobs, and the person that they hired was cheaper, but they didn't have any supervision. And it turned out our bid was lower if you factored in the cost of what the supervision would have been. And it just turned out this one customer was a project manager himself, so he was retired, so he took on the project but he wished he would have had a company that had an on-site project manager.
Well, and I think, now as we've covered these red flags, and unfortunately I didn't recognize them in the beginning, and I didn't really learn about them all until we started our relationship. And I think once I'd had this bad, finding you, and so how do you find a contractor? We've talked about all these points, and what I quickly learned is I could see that there were a lot of contractors out there. I didn't know it was as many as you just stated. But how do you find somebody that can do all the things that we just said? So I started doing research on the internet, and actually had gone to found an article written by the folks that put together This Old House and National Public Radio. It seemed to be pretty reputable, and they wrote a really good article about the things that you should look for. And one of the things that they mentioned in this article was that high-end contractors that meet all these requirements, they voluntarily belong to guilds, contractors guilds, kind of a professional association of contractors, of people that contractors that pride themselves on being at the top of their profession. And of course, I'd never heard of this before, but I read it, and sure enough, I started looking at these guilds. And I was trying, and one of the recommendations is that you find someone that is used to working in your area, so it should be fairly close to your project because of dealing with local ordinances and the city, right, and different types of regulatory agencies that you might have to deal with, like on our project here. And so sure enough, I looked in these contractors who found this guild, and that is how I found Masterworks and found you, was through the guild. And interestingly enough, I called you. I don't know if you even remember this. I called you and left you a message, and you called me back relatively quickly, like within the hour, I think, or something like that. And we just started talking, and I kind of told you what my problem was, and you started. You weren't immediately trying to say. In fact, I wasn't sure that you were even interested in doing a job like the one I talked about, which I also thought was an interesting thing. Is how hungry is this? Is this person saying, "Oh, won't even listen to you," but I'll take your job no matter what. But what you were interested in doing was, one, you told me how sorry you were that I had this experience, and two, you kind of said, "Hey, I'll send you some stuff on the types of things that you need to look for in a contractor," and we can talk some more about your project. And I think that started our relationship. But very soon after that, one of the things that I wanted to do is I asked you, could I see one of your projects, and would you be willing to make one of your clients available to me to talk to? And so you did, and we went to visit this person, and the project was equal to, or actually probably greater in scope than the one I was looking at. A very large project, very high-end home, much more expensive than the one that I'm currently that we're living here. And what I found, immediately interesting was that the owner of the house met us at the door, threw their arms around you, and you guys obviously had a pretty good relationship. And although what I expected was, I thought, well, that's nice. Obviously they ended up on good terms, so that's a good sign. But what I really thought was interesting was how that I guess I expected that this person would probably either not be there or just kind of go about their business. But the homeowner stayed with us through the entire tour, which we were there, I think, almost 2 hours, and was so proud of everything that had happened to the house. So it really, of course, if I wasn't sold, I was sold then, that, to have that type of feeling from a customer, I mean, we can think of, you think about whatever you do, whatever you purchase on a day-to-day basis, how often do you have that type of experience with somebody, much less someone that's going to do something you're going to go on this journey with that's going to be this extensive. But it was kind of, we kind of talked about these red flags, and I learned them the hard way, maybe even couldn't articulate them the way that we have here today at that point. But, we talked about, right in the very beginning, you offered up how you would manage the program. I was really worried about liability on the property, insurance and things. So you covered the things that you just talked about as a red flag. We talked about the finances, and I thought, well, the worst I'll ever be is 2 weeks out on this thing, and I can always, so it gave me that sense of confidence. Getting to meet your customers and you made multiple customers available to me. After I met the one, I really didn't feel that it was a good use of my time to interview more, but I certainly could have, and I'm certain that you would have allowed me to do that. What really surprised me, and you just touched on it as a red flag, was the site supervisor. I asked you specifically, are you going to be at the project all the time? Because that was something that was important to me. And you said, no, I won't. I'll be here when the important thing is, but I'm going to introduce you to your project supervisor who's going to manage and be there the entire time. So I think I still feel that I was lucky to find you, because I think that there's a lot of contractors out there, but there aren't a lot who are as good as you are, and as good as your team at Masterworks. But I think that knowing what I know now, and the things that we talked about today, almost in a checklist, I think if you approached it that way, you would stand a good chance of finding somebody that is good and reputable and can do the quality work to get the job done.
Yeah.